The wailing alarms interrupted my morning coffee, steam still rising from my cup as the automatic garage door lifted to expose a brilliant display of flashing emergency lights. A pair of police cruisers had positioned themselves to block my exit, their radio chatter filling the air, while across the roadway a woman dressed in an eye-catching pink jacket aimed her finger directly at me as if she'd just identified a winning ticket. "There he is," she declared loudly. "There's the individual who took my automobile." The vehicle she referenced happened to be my treasure, my personal undertaking, my 3-year journey of bloodied knuckles and midnight hours, a vintage beauty that sparkled like a precious stone beneath the dawn light. A uniformed officer instructed me to move away from the vehicle and maintain visibility of my hands. His partner requested my identification documents. The woman continued her commentary as if addressing an audience through a microphone. Her story involved purchasing this exact automobile, paying in cash the previous day, and discovering me now wheeling it from my storage space as though executing an escape. She brandished a folder, suggesting the plastic enclosed papers within could serve as legitimate evidence. My fellow residents emerged wearing bathrobes and flip-flops to observe the spectacle, clutching their morning beverages, their expressions mixing intrigue with poorly concealed entertainment. The Homeowners Association leader materialized shortly after, attired like an advertisement for cleaning products, holding his ever-present writing pad. He positioned himself alongside the woman, giving solemn nods as she recounted her interpretation of events. He contributed that the association had implemented an urgent regulation prohibiting certain automobiles from being stored in visible locations, and implied that my vehicle appeared dubiously obtained through legitimate channels. I maintained composure and presented the officers with my vehicle registration. My identity corresponded with the license plate, the property address, and the identification number etched into the chassis. The woman argued that criminals frequently alter vehicle identification numbers. When she finally revealed her alleged purchase receipt, it resembled a template downloaded from the internet, lacking any identification number and bearing a signature that appeared created with a failing writing instrument. She claimed the vendor, someone called Rick, had promised to send her additional information via text message. This Rick had supposedly informed her he was transporting the car to a detailing establishment. She mentioned Shine King, a company that doesn't operate in our community. The officers looked at each other questioningly and inquired about her residence. She indicated a location 2 cul-de-sacs away. Strange, I reflected, that she had traveled all this distance rather than contacting police from her own property. The association president adjusted his stance and proclaimed that regardless of ownership, the automobile posed a risk to neighborhood aesthetics. He discussed emergency assemblies, possible penalties, and new parking limitations. I could perceive the strategy. If they couldn't confiscate my car directly, they would make retaining it insufferable. The officers, to their professional credit, remained concentrated on the ownership matter. I welcomed them to examine the car's ownership certificate, insurance documentation, and photographic evidence of my restoration work. They reviewed the before and after images. Deteriorated shell to gleaming masterpiece. The woman mumbled that the photographs were likely stolen as well. The dispatch verification returned clear. The identification number and plate matched my records without question. The police returned my documentation and informed the woman this constituted a civil dispute. She responded poorly to that determination. She summoned a tall teenager wearing a reflective safety vest who alleged he had witnessed me towing the vehicle home the previous evening. When I questioned what he was doing at that late hour, he stated he was conducting Homeowners Association security rounds. His account faltered under gentle interrogation, but the woman embraced it as absolute truth. Eventually the gathering began to scatter. The woman remained her attention fixed on the automobile. She revealed she had been saving money for years, that her father had promised to teach her driving in one similar to it before he departed. She inquired if I would consider selling. I explained the car was the single thing that had remained when everything else in my existence had abandoned me. She departed without further words. By nightfall, the association email arrived. Emergency assembly. Suggested towing privileges, new penalties for visible automotive maintenance, prohibitions on non-factory exhaust systems. I understood exactly the direction this was heading. I positioned a chair in the garage and waited. The sun had just disappeared behind the rooftops when a white truck rolled to a gradual stop across the street. Tinted glass, engine running. The woman glanced toward it and became motionless. A man emerged from the passenger side and called her name. He demanded the remainder of his payment or the car that evening. He displayed an arm decorated with a crude crown tattoo, and informed her the title he had sold her was a duplicate, that it belonged to someone else who remained unaware it was missing. Then his gaze moved to me, and the manner in which he observed my car made it obvious that this situation was far from concluded. Sleep eluded me that evening. It wasn't merely the menace in the man's tone, or how his eyes lingered on my automobile. It was realizing I'd been pulled into someone else's chaos without warning. My garage was secured tightly. Security illumination activated, surveillance equipment operating, but my instincts suggested that wouldn't deter them if they truly desired it. And based on the association email broadcast that arrived at 11:47 p.m., they wanted it in their particular manner as well. The message header stated emergency regulation consideration non-compliant vehicles, and the language was barely disguised. They argued classic or modified cars could decrease community worth and attract criminal activity. The contradiction wasn't overlooked by me. They were utilizing the crime they'd created to justify prohibiting the thing they were targeting. The following morning, I remained vigilant while enjoying coffee on the driveway. The car sat there in the garage, shining, because I knew the light would catch the buff chrome and irritate Karen. Yes, I'd finally determined that was the only appropriate name for the woman in the pink jacket. As expected, she appeared around 900s, walking down the street in small heels, the association president following behind her. They pretended to be examining the neighborhood, but their attention never strayed from my driveway. Karen stopped precisely at the property boundary. "We'll be discussing the matter of the stolen car tonight at the meeting," she announced with the type of certainty only possessed by people who are incorrect, but convinced they're correct. I suggested she should probably discuss the matter of the fraudulent purchase receipt she'd been displaying to the police instead. She didn't react. She simply smiled as if she possessed knowledge I lacked and walked away. That evening, the community center parking area was filled. I entered carrying a folder of documentation under my arm titled Insurance, receipts for components, even dated photographs from every phase of the restoration. The association board sat at the front like a court of judgment. Karen in the first row, leaning forward as if preparing to attack. The meeting began with the typical nonsense trash container positioning, grass heights, but they moved to vehicle appearance standards within 10 minutes. The president outlined the emergency necessity for new regulations, referencing a recent incident involving suspected vehicle theft. All attention turned to me. I stood and calmly presented the facts. My car was completely legal, registered under my name, and had been in my ownership for years. Karen jumped from her chair without being acknowledged to speak. She claimed the police didn't conduct a thorough investigation. That connections likely helped me avoid consequences. She even mentioned having a witness, our association's supposed security volunteer, who had observed a tow truck delivering a suspicious vehicle to my address. I noted that I have a 2-post lift in my garage, not exactly equipment you find at a criminal operation, and questioned why the witness had been lurking near my property at 2:00 a.m. He stammered about routine patrol until the room began to murmur. The president attempted to restore order, but I wasn't finished. I produced the decisive evidence. A printed copy of the police report from the previous night, which documented there was no evidence of theft. All paperwork matched and no additional action was necessary. I read it aloud. Karen's face reddened, but she didn't retreat. She changed strategies, arguing the appearance of the car alone decreased property values because it wasn't consistent with the association aesthetic. Someone in the back asked if we were now prohibiting things for being too polished. That earned a few laughs. When the vote occurred on the new standards, it was evenly divided. The president announced a tie-breaking vote would happen at a special closed session with only board members. Translation: they'd approve it without the troublesome homeowners present. That revealed everything I needed to understand. This wasn't about regulations, it was about authority. As I departed, Karen intercepted me in the parking lot. "You can act intelligent all you want, but you can't prevail against the board," she said, stepping closer. Her perfume nearly assaulted my senses. "You'll sell that car or it'll disappear." "Your decision." I simply smiled and told her I'd consider that. She smirked as if she'd achieved victory and strutted away. I didn't return home. Instead, I drove directly to my friend Tony's workshop, a secure storage and restoration facility with more surveillance than a gambling establishment. Tony owed me a favor and I wasn't about to leave my car where the association or Karen's criminal associates could access it. By midnight, it was secured behind a steel rolling door with an armed security system. I returned home with an empty garage and quiet satisfaction. Let them conspire against something that wasn't even present. 2 days later, a white pickup reappeared in the neighborhood. I was exercising my dog when I noticed it idling at the curb near my house. The passenger door opened and out stepped the same man from before. Tattooed forearm, inexpensive gold chain, eyes scanning my driveway. He appeared puzzled to see the space vacant. When he spotted me, his grin didn't extend to his eyes. "Where's the ride?" he asked as if we were acquaintances. I told him I sold it. His grin disappeared. "To whom?" I said I didn't know. "I just accepted cash from someone at the service station." He didn't appreciate that response. Later that evening, I caught him and another individual wandering near Karen's residence. They weren't discreet. One was carrying a small bag, the type you don't use for exercise equipment. I remained in the shadows and observed them knock on her door. She answered. There was an intense exchange, and then one of them threw up his hands and departed. The other followed, but not before glancing back down the street in my direction. The next morning, Karen was at my door, pounding hard enough to shake the frame. She accused me of concealing the car to avoid the association's new standards, which she announced had been approved unanimously in the closed session. I told her she couldn't regulate what she couldn't observe, and she threatened to fine me for non-disclosure of vehicle storage location. I laughed aloud, which didn't improve her disposition. She left, promising to escalate this to legal channels. That was my signal. If she wanted legal action, I'd provide her legal action on my terms. I began investigating the association's bylaws, searching for any clauses about closed sessions, conflict of interest, or misuse of board power. It didn't take long to discover valuable information: a requirement that all decisions affecting property rights must be voted on by the complete membership, not just the board. Their special session vote was illegitimate. I made duplicates and kept them accessible. What I didn't anticipate was the knock at my door the following night, not from the association but from a police officer. He said Karen had filed a complaint accusing me of hiding stolen property again. Only this time she claimed she had evidence. A text message from an anonymous source saying they saw my car in a chop shop on the town's outskirts. I told him I'd be happy to show him the car's location, and 20 minutes later, we were standing in Tony's shop, looking at my untouched classic under bright LED illumination. Tony even offered him a cup of coffee while the officer completed his notes. By the time we left, the officer muttered something about neighbors with excessive free time. The next association meeting was a week away, and I had no intention of entering unprepared. Karen thought she was fighting a car dispute, but I knew we were really playing a chess game over control, optics, and credibility. That meant I had to strike in a way that didn't just win. It humiliated her in front of the people whose opinions she valued most, but to accomplish it, I needed witnesses, leverage, and perfect timing. Step 1 was establishing the foundation. I began visiting my neighbors, the ones who'd been smirking at the absurdity of the first meeting. I didn't rant, didn't spread gossip. I simply asked if they liked the way the association was being managed lately. Most rolled their eyes. A few admitted they were tired of closed-door decisions and weaponized emergency regulations. I hinted, just hinted, that something significant was coming at the next meeting. That captured their curiosity. Step 2 was collecting evidence. Tony had security footage of my car being delivered to his shop, as well as every minute it had remained there untouched. We assembled a clean timeline, date and time I moved it, officer verification, Karen's second false report, and the chop shop wild goose chase. Every clip was timestamped, clear and indisputable. But I wasn't stopping there. I filed a public records request for the police reports from both of Karen's emergency calls. It took several days, but when they arrived they read like a comedy of errors. Both closed as baseless, both showing my name and ownership prominently. While I was preparing, the harassment didn't cease. Twice I caught Karen standing across the street with her phone taking pictures of my driveway like she was documenting a crime scene. One afternoon I came home to find an association notice of violation taped to my door citing storage of a prohibited vehicle off-site. Yes, they'd created a rule stating that all vehicles owned by residents must be stored on the property unless parked in designated public areas. It was so obviously targeted at me that I nearly laughed. Nearly. Then there was the pickup again. Late one night I saw it slowly cruise past, its engine rumbling low. This time I walked straight into the street and waved. The truck accelerated and disappeared. That confirmed my suspicion. They weren't just Karen's imaginary friends. There was a business element here. My guess, she'd given that shady guy a down payment on the car, and now he was expecting her to deliver. That meant she was under pressure, which meant she'd be careless. Sure enough, 2 days before the meeting, she slipped. I was walking by the community park when I overheard Karen on the phone, pacing by the picnic tables. Her voice was sharp, defensive. "I told you I'll get it. He's just hiding it. The board is on my side. We'll find him until he caves. No, I don't care if you have to show up again. Just don't do it during the day." She turned and saw me. The way her face drained told me she knew I'd heard enough to connect dots she didn't want connected. I didn't confront her. That was bait I wasn't taking. Instead, I doubled down on my plan. I printed copies of the police reports, the bylaw section showing their special session vote was invalid, and still frames from Tony's footage. Then for the piece de resistance, I prepared a short, tight speech, just enough to drop the bomb, prove my case, and walk away. The night of the meeting, the room was packed. People who hadn't been to an association meeting in years were there, standing along the walls. The board sat at their long table, looking mildly irritated at the turnout. Karen was in the front row again, pink blazer swapped for a navy one, her serious business look. She glanced over her shoulder at me and smirked. I took a seat 2 rows back, letting her think I was going to play defense again. The meeting started with routine items, but when the president opened the floor for community concerns, I stood. I'd like to address the repeated false accusations made against me and the misuse of association authority in connection with my vehicle, I said, voice steady. A few people chuckled. Everyone knew exactly who I was talking about. Karen tried to interject immediately, but the president told her to let me finish. I laid out the timeline in the simplest possible terms: when the car was moved, the police verification, the security footage, the 2 baseless emergency calls. I held up the reports for the room to see, letting the black and white text do most of the talking. The murmurs started about 30 seconds in. By the time I pointed out the clause in the bylaws invalidating their special session vote, there were full-on whispers and a few outright, "That's not right" comments. Karen was shifting in her seat, eyes darting at the board. When I mentioned overhearing her at the park discussing getting the car, and not doing it during the day, the president actually sat back in his chair, arms crossed. I didn't embellish. I didn't accuse her of criminal conspiracy. I just said the words exactly as I'd heard them, and then I let the silence hang. That's when I played the final card. Given the repeated harassment, false police reports, making without member approval, I'll be submitting a formal petition to call a vote of no confidence in the current board. I held up a clipboard with a stack of signature sheets already half filled from my neighbor visits. The room broke into open conversation. People leaning over to whisper, a couple nodding at me directly. Karen sprang up and accused me of lying, doctoring evidence, manipulating neighbors. But her voice cracked, and the harder she pushed, the more she sounded like exactly what she was: desperate. A man in the back shouted, "Then why did the cops clear him twice?" Another added, "We never voted on that car rule." The board president tried to gavel it all back to order, but it was like trying to catch water with a rake. I didn't stay for the rest. I left the stack of police reports and bylaw copies on the front table for anyone to take and walked out into the night. The air felt lighter than it had in weeks. My phone buzzed before I reached my driveway. Tony. He'd spotted the white pickup outside his shop earlier, parked across the street for 20 minutes before leaving. We agreed to step up security just in case. That's when the text came through from an unknown numbers. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Last chance." No name, no details, but I knew exactly where it came from. I saved the message, screenshotted it, and sent it to Tony with a short note. "I think they're going to try something soon. The next day, the association drama took a sharp turn. 3 different neighbors told me Karen had been going door to door trying to convince people that I was some kind of scam artist who preyed on older women who didn't know about cars. The fact that she had to specify older women told me she was testing a sob story. It wasn't working. 2 of the neighbors said they told her they'd already signed my petition. By evening, I had more than enough signatures to trigger a special vote on removing the board. I dropped the petition in the association's mailbox with a polite cover letter citing the relevant bylaw. If they ignored it, I'd take it to the county's association oversight office. Either way, the clock was now ticking. By the time the sun came up, the shop break-in footage was already backed up to 3 separate drives, emailed to the police, and in the hands of a county association oversight officer I'd been quietly corresponding with for the past week. The officer's response was short but telling. "Thank you. This will be useful in our review." It wasn't hard to imagine how board president and ally sheltering an association member who hires car thieves would play in the official report. At 900 am, a patrol car pulled up in front of my house. 2 officers stepped out, not the same ones from the original emergency drama. They asked me to confirm my statement about the car, Karen's accusations, and the recent threat. I handed over the text message from the night before, the shop footage, and the police reports. One of them raised an eyebrow when he saw Karen's name come up for the 3rd time in a criminal complaint. They didn't say it outright, but I could tell they were starting to connect the dots. I didn't see Karen until later that afternoon. She was standing outside the community center, phone to her ear, one hand clutching her clipboard like it was a life preserver. Her voice was low but tense. When she spotted me, she hung up and made a beeline over. "You think you're clever," she said without preamble, "but you've just dragged the whole neighborhood into a mess. And when it blows back, don't expect anyone to help you." I asked her if that was the same help she'd gotten from her tattooed friend when he tried to jimmy open Tony's shop door. She froze just for half a second before sneering. "I don't know what you're talking about." Her denial would have been more convincing if she hadn't immediately looked away. That evening, my petition to remove the board was the talk of the neighborhood. Copies of the break-in stills had somehow found their way into half a dozen email inboxes. No one admitted to spreading them, but I had my suspicions. One neighbor, a retired cop, told me flat out that people were done with the board's antics. Another asked if I was running for president after the vote. I wasn't yet, but I kept that to myself. The next morning, the board tried to get ahead of it. An email went out claiming malicious rumors were being spread about certain members, and that unauthorized surveillance was being used to harass residents. The irony of them crying foul over security footage of an actual attempted break-in was almost funny. Almost. Karen, of course, took it further. She started parking her SUV in front of my house during the day, sitting inside with the windows down like she was daring me to confront her. I didn't take the bait. Every time she was there for more than 15 minutes, I simply called the non-emergency police line to report a suspicious vehicle. The responding officers were polite but efficient, and after the 3rd visit, she stopped doing it. Tony called that night with news. The police had picked up one of the 2 men from the break-in. Guess which one? Tattooed forearm, cheap gold chain, same grin that never reached his eyes. He'd been caught on an unrelated charge, but when they ran his prints and saw the shop footage, they added attempted burglary to his list. According to Tony's contact in the department, he wasn't thrilled about the prospect of taking the fall alone. That meant Karen's name might be coming up in a police interview very soon. 2 days before the scheduled association vote, I woke up to find my mailbox stuffed, literally crammed with glossy flyers. On one side, a photo of my car taken from my own driveway weeks ago with the words, "Is this theft hiding in our neighborhood?" in block letters. On the other side, a bullet point list of accusations, every single one already disproven by police reports. The kicker: the flyer was paid for by Friends of Community Integrity, a name no one had ever heard of, but the return address was the association's P.O. box. Subtlety was dead. I didn't waste time getting angry. Instead, I collected a few copies, scanned them, and emailed them to the association oversight officer, attaching the police reports for reference. I also printed them and brought them to 3 of my more outspoken neighbors, the kind who could turn a whisper into a full-blown street discussion by lunch. By evening, Karen's flyer campaign had turned into the punchline of the neighborhood. Someone taped one to the community bulletin board with "Fecalus" scrawled across it in red marker. The night of the vote, the room was standing room only again. This time I dressed for the occasion, not a suit, but clean, pressed, and deliberate. Calm authority. The board president opened with a stiff statement about baseless attacks and maintaining unity, but the mood in the room was already shifting. When the vote finally came, it wasn't close. The board, Karen's allies included, was removed by a wide margin. An interim board was appointed on the spot, and the first order of business was nullifying every emergency rule passed in the last 3 months. Just like that, the car rule was dead. Karen didn't stick around after the vote. She stormed out before the count was even final, muttering into her phone. I knew better than to think she was finished. People like her don't just accept losing. They look for ways to claw back ground, even if it means burning everything else down in the process. Sure enough, 2 days later, I found an envelope on my porch. No return address, just my name written in block letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You took something from me. Now I take something from you." No signature, but I didn't need one. That night, I moved the car again, this time to a locked storage facility 3 towns over. It wasn't paranoia, it was precaution. The following week was quiet. Too quiet. Flyers, no SUV surveillance, no association drama. That's how I knew she was winding up for something bigger. My confirmation came when Tawny called me out of the blue. "You're gonna love this," he said. "Wes, who just tried to sell a classic car in perfect condition to one of my clients. Same make, same model, not even bothering to hide it." The seller had been vague about details, but the contact number traced back to someone in Karen's extended family. That was my opening. I tipped the police, forwarding Tony's statement and the ad. They arranged a meeting with the seller, posing as a buyer. The car they were shown wasn't mine. It was a stripped-down junker with mismatched panels. But the title they tried to pass off was a fake with my VIN on it. That was enough for possession of a forged document and attempted fraud. And the name on the forged title, the tattooed man's handwriting all over it. That tied the break and crew directly to a VIN forgery case. By the time the police knocked on Karen's door with a warrant to search for documents and items related to fraudulent vehicle transactions, half the neighborhood had gathered at a safe distance to watch. They didn't find my car because it wasn't anywhere near here, but they did walk out with a box of paperwork and a laptop. The look on Karen's face as they loaded it into the cruiser was the first time I'd seen her without that smug, unflappable mask. Later, I learned from a neighbor who had a cousin in the department that the laptop had emails between Karen and the tattooed man negotiating payment upon delivery of the car. She'd even sent him my address, garage photos, and a note that read "easy in and out. He's too smug to think anyone will touch it." Any illusion of plausible deniability she thought she had was gone. Karen didn't disappear after the warrant, she adapted. The association board was gone, her parking rules were shredded, and the neighborhood's patience had worn thin. But she still had one weapon left: she could play the victim. It started small. I'd see her outside chatting with the same neighbors who had cheered the board's removal, speaking in hushed tones and shaking her head like she was sharing tragic news. A couple of times, I caught her glancing at me mid-sentence as though daring me to come closer. Then came the Facebook posts, long, winding essays about being targeted by a vindictive neighbor and how gossip destroys communities. She never used my name, but the references to "a man with a flashy car" and police harassment made her target obvious. Most people weren't buying it. After all, they'd seen the break-in footage, the flyers, and the police visits. But Karen wasn't trying to win everyone. She just needed to muddy the waters enough to make herself seem like a misunderstood martyr, instead of the architect of her own downfall. And that told me something important: she was trying to stall. People who stall usually have something in motion behind the scenes. Sure enough, one of my more talkative neighbors, Mara, showed up at my door one evening, a little breathless. "You didn't hear it from me," she said. "But Karen's been talking about a final move that'll put you in your place." She'd overheard it while walking past Karen's yard. Apparently, Karen had told someone on the phone that she had proof I was involved in something illegal and that, once it's public, he'll never show his face here again. I didn't know what her proof was, but given her track record, it was either fabricated, stolen, or wildly misinterpreted. Either way, it wouldn't be enough to stand up in court, but it might be enough to cause temporary chaos. And that's when it hit me. She was going to try to turn my own tactics against me. If she couldn't beat me in reality, she'd beat me in perception, at least long enough to get her allies or the board reinstated. So, I set a trap. 2 days later, I parked my car, yes, my actual car, back in my driveway. Tony had tuned it to perfection, and it looked like something out of a collector's magazine. I washed it in the driveway on a sunny Saturday morning, knowing Karen wouldn't be able to resist watching. Sure enough, by the time I was drying the chrome, I could see her face peeking through the blinds of her front window. I left the garage door open all afternoon, tools laid out, parts stacked neatly, everything visible. I even left my laptop open on a nearby workbench, the screen dark, but the lid tilted just enough to suggest I'd been working on something important. Inside the laptop's downloads folder was a single PDF file with the innocuous title "Car Appraisal Confidential." Inside the PDF, a series of nonsense numbers and an obvious watermark reading, "This is a bait file." The moment it was open, the file's metadata would log the IP address of the device that accessed it. That night, I left the garage open just long enough to forget to close it until 10 p.m. I sat in my living room, lights off, watching my security feed. At 90:43, a shadow slipped inside. Hood up, flashlight beam sweeping the workbench. The laptop disappeared into a tote bag, and the shadow hurried off into the dark. I didn't move. I just watched the feed, made sure the footage was saved in 3 places, and waited. The next day, Karen was on Facebook again, posting about leaked documents, proving that certain individuals were selling classic cars without paying taxes. She even included a blurry screenshot of the bait PDF's first page. My phone buzzed as Tony texted, "She took the bait." I replied with a screenshot of the IP log, Karen's home network. I didn't confront her publicly. I went to the police with the footage, the IP log, and the fact that she'd posted stolen property online. By evening, they were at her door again, this time with a warrant specifically for electronics related to data theft. She tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, but the fact that she'd entered my garage without permission made it criminal trespass on top of the theft. The neighborhood watched as her laptop and phone were bagged and carried out. Even her closest gossip allies didn't look eager to defend her anymore. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 2 nights later, my phone buzzed at 2:17 a.m. with a security alert, this time from the driveway. A figure in dark clothes was standing next to my car, crouched low, wrench in hand. Before I could even hit the porch light, the motion-triggered floodlights kicked on. The figure froze, then bolted toward a waiting vehicle, a white pickup of course, and jumped inside. But this time, they didn't get far. I'd parked another car at the end of my driveway, boxing them in just enough to slow their escape. That gave the police, who were already patrolling after the Karen break-in incidents, enough time to intercept them 2 streets over. The driver was the tattooed man again. The passenger was someone new but not unknown, Karen's cousin, the same one who'd been tied to the fake VN sale. In the back seat was a duffel bag containing a cordless saw, bolt cutters, and a set of plates that didn't match any registered vehicle. With that, the investigation into Karen shifted from neighborhood squabble to organized criminal activity. She wasn't just a nuisance neighbor anymore. She was a link in an actual criminal chain involving stolen property and forged documents. And the police weren't asking me for proof anymore. They were telling me what they'd found. By the end of the week, Karen was facing charges for criminal trespass, theft by unlawful taking, and conspiracy. The VN fraud case was still in progress, but the stolen garage laptop and the IP trail tied her directly to the harassment campaign. The association oversight office had already moved to bar her from serving on any board in the county for the next decade. When she was finally taken away in the back of a cruiser, she didn't shout or flail. She just stared at me over her shoulder, eyes full of that same venom I'd seen the day we first clashed, and said, "This isn't over." I didn't reply. I just closed my garage door and let the latch click into place. The neighborhood changed after that. Without the constant drama, people started talking to each other again about normal things: gardening, block parties, kids' school events. The association under its interim board actually fixed things instead of policing them. And my car, it stayed in the driveway, gleaming in the sun, unbothered and unchallenged. I never forgot, though, that Karen's kind doesn't vanish completely. They wait, they plot, they reappear when you least expect them. But I'd learned something too: if you stay calm, keep your evidence, and let them trip over their own arrogance, you don't just win. You make it impossible for them to play the same game twice. And every time I see a pink blazer in a store window, I smile to myself, because somewhere, Karen's still thinking about that car. And how she lost it without ever having it in the first place.